I heard my daughter make a sound I had never heard from a baby before. It was not hunger. It was not pain from a diaper pin or a cold hand. It was a sharp, torn cry, like her breath had been stolen and given back in pieces. The kitchen had been quiet a second earlier. My wife had been 2 steps from the sink. I remembered the exact way the air changed, like the house had leaned toward that sound. We ran down the hall and hit the bedroom door that we kept locked. The lock did not belong on a child's room, but it had been there. My hand shook on the knob. I fumbled the key ring so hard the metal clicked against the wood, loud enough to feel like a warning. I tried one key, then another, and my daughter screamed again. My wife crowded me, her shoulder pressed into mine, her breathing fast and controlled in a way that scared me more than panic. The wrong key caught. I yanked it out and cut my finger on the teeth. I found the right one by touch more than sight, and the lock finally turned. The door opened and I saw my son standing over the crib. He was a teenager then, tall enough that he did not need to bend much. He held a kitchen knife in his right hand, angled down like he had been practicing the motion in his head. My daughter was on her back, twisting, her face red, her arms flailing in tight, desperate circles. I saw thin lines of blood on her blanket and on the inside of her wrist, just shallow scratches, but they were there. My mind tried to reject what my eyes showed me, and in that half-second I did nothing. My wife moved first. She crossed the room like she had been pulled by a rope. Her hand snapped out and knocked the knife away so hard it hit the wall and clattered under the dresser. She drove her shoulder into my son's chest and shoved him back from the crib. I grabbed my daughter and pressed her against me, turning my body between her and him. My son looked at me, not shocked, not sorry. He looked annoyed, like we had interrupted him. Then my wife hit him. Once, clean and fast, and his head snapped to the side. Then again. Her face was blank, but her eyes were wide, and something in her posture changed like a hinge broke. I held the baby and I did not step in. I backed out of the room, hearing the dull rhythm of fists and the sound of my son stumbling into furniture. Before we judged what happened next, we needed to understand what the last 16 years were like, because in the next seconds my wife stopped the knife, and then something in her broke. We had planned our first child like people planned a better life. We had talked about names, about paint colors, about what kind of parents we wanted to be. When my son was born, I held him and felt that heavy, clean joy that made my hands shake. My wife cried from relief. I remembered thinking that all the hard parts of life had been leading to that moment, and that the rest would be simple because we loved him. The crying started early, and at first it sounded normal. It sounded like adjustment. It sounded like a baby learning the world. We fed him, changed him, rocked him, walked the hallway with him against our chests until our knees hurt. He cried anyway. The sound did not rise and fall like other bobbies I had heard. It stayed sharp. It stayed urgent. It lasted through the day and then followed us into the night. After a few weeks, we stopped speaking to each other in full sentences. We spoke in whispers and short orders. Bottle, diaper, take him, please. I watched my wife stand in the living room at 3 in the morning, bouncing him with the same motion over and over, her jaw clenched, her eyes open but not really seeing. I did the same thing when she finally sat down, exhausted, her arms empty and trembling. We tried every method people offered. We tried swaddles, different formulas, different bottles, different nipples, different temperatures. We tried driving him around the block because someone said the vibration helped. We tried white noise and darkness and light. We tried holding him on his stomach across our forearms, patting his back until our hands went numb. We tried letting him cry for short stretches because we were told he would learn to settle. It never worked. If we put him down, even for a minute, the crying turned into screaming. We took him to doctors. We drove to appointments on almost no sleep, carrying him in with red eyes and a diaper bag that felt like a brick. The doctors checked his ears, his stomach, his reflexes. They asked about feeding schedules. They asked if we were keeping the house calm. They asked if we were stressed. They said colic. They said reflux. They said some bobbies were just like that. They told us it would pass. They said you just have to survive it. Survive it became the only goal. I started to feel ashamed of the sound. I did not want neighbors to hear it through the walls. I did not want someone to knock and ask if everything was okay, because I did not know how to answer. Sometimes in the afternoon, when the crying had been going for hours and my hands were slick with sweat, I stood near the front window and saw curtains shift across the street. I imagined people counting the hours, judging us, picturing what kind of parents let a baby scream like that. I wanted to tell them we were not ignoring him. We were drowning with him in our arms. My wife and I fought without meaning to. Not loud fights, not even angry ones. We fought by failing each other. I would promise I would take the night shift, and then I would sit in a chair and blink and realize I had been asleep for a few seconds while he screamed. She would come in, eyes wide, and snatch him away like she was saving him from me. I would feel accused even though she said nothing. She would go back into the bedroom and I would hear her whispering to him, begging him to stop, begging him to look at her like he knew her. There were moments when he went quiet, and those moments scared me too. He would stop suddenly, like a switch had been flipped, and stare with a hard, focused look that did not feel like a baby's wandering gaze. I told myself it meant he was finally calming down. I told myself it meant he was learning. But in those quiet seconds, the house felt wrong. The silence felt loaded, like something was waiting. We still tried to bond. We took pictures because that was what you did. We held him close and told him we loved him, even when the words sounded strange in our mouths, said through clenched teeth and shaking fatigue. My wife sang to him until her voice grew hoarse. I walked him across the kitchen tiles, heel to toe, for hours, until my mind drifted and I forgot what day it was. Sometimes he fell asleep against my chest, and I felt a rush of victory so strong it made me want to cry. Then he woke up 20 minutes later, and the crying began again, as if sleep had only reset him. By the time 13 months had passed, I had stopped expecting relief. I expected noise. I expected that sound to fill every corner of the house, to follow us even when he was not in the room. It changed us. It made our home feel like a place we had to endure instead of live in. And underneath the exhaustion, a quiet thought started to grow in me, one I did not want to admit. What if this was not a phase? When the crying finally stopped, we thought it was over, but it was only changing shape. When the crying changed, it did not become peace. It became intention. My son started to break things before he could explain why he was angry. At first it looked like normal toddler chaos, but it did not stop when we corrected him. He tore books apart page by page and watched our faces while he did it. He dumped food on the floor, not as an accident, but as a test. If I cleaned it, he did it again. If I raised my voice, he smiled like he had found the right button. As he grew, the destruction gained weight. He slammed drawers until the tracks bent. He pulled cabinet doors until the hinges loosened. If he could not get his way, he found something that belonged to us and ruined it. I started to hide anything that mattered in the trunk of my car, like I was living with a thief. My wife and I stopped leaving mail on the counter because he tore it up. We stopped buying nice towels because he cut holes in them. We stopped hanging pictures because he knocked them down and stepped on the glass. We learned to watch his hands more than his face. His face lied. His hands told the truth. At school, teachers called us in with the same careful tone every time, like they were approaching a wild animal through a fence. It started with pushing and shouting. Then it became hitting, then throwing objects, then chasing other kids for the fun of watching them panic. He did not just lose his temper. He chose targets. He waited for the right moment. When he got pulled away, he went quiet and looked calm, like he was the adult in the room and everyone else was overreacting. He got removed from classrooms again and again. He got placed in programs with smaller groups and extra staff. Nothing held. Every new plan lasted until he decided he hated it. Then the calls started again. Suspension, meeting, safety plan, another meeting. People asked about our home life, our discipline, our marriage, our stress. We answered honestly because we wanted help. The more we told, the more I felt like I was confessing to a crime I did not understand. Inside the house, my wife and I built our days around prevention. We did not relax, we scanned. We did not leave scissors in a drawer he could reach. We counted knives. We stopped buying glass cups. We put latches on cabinets long after other parents removed them. We moved cleaning supplies to a locked toolbox. We kept our bedroom door closed even in the afternoon, not for privacy but for safety. There was a moment when I realized the house no longer belonged to us. It belonged to his moods. We tried to get professional help early and we kept trying. Therapists, specialists, doctors, evaluations. Some people spoke softly and looked tired as soon as they met him. Others acted confident and told us rules and charts and reward systems. We followed every instruction because we needed to believe in something. We used timers and calm voices. We used consequences and structure. We used praise for small good moments like they were rare coins. My son learned the language of treatment faster than we did. He learned what to say to sound sorry. He learned what to say to sound confused. He learned when to cry. In sessions, he described his feelings with a flat tone, then went home and destroyed something because we asked him to brush his teeth. As he reached late childhood, his anger started to carry a colder edge. He did not only break objects, he tried to break rules on purpose. He stole from us and then denied it with steady eyes. He waited until my wife turned her back and then he made a mess that felt like a message. Sometimes he stood too close to his mother and stared up at her like he wanted her to flinch. She never did. She stayed controlled. But I saw her shoulders tighten, and I saw the way she locked the bathroom door when she showered. One evening he got access to a sharp object that should have been out of reach. I heard my wife yell my name with a sound that made my stomach drop. I ran in and saw my son holding it like a tool, not like a toy. I stepped in too fast, thinking I could grab it and end it. He moved with a quickness that shocked me, and the edge caught me. It was not a deep wound, but it bled enough to turn the sink water pink. While my wife wrapped my hand, my son watched with a calm face, like he had been curious about what would happen. That was the first time I realized he could hurt us without even trying hard. After that, we changed the house. We bought heavier interior doors. We added keyed locks, not just on the front door but on rooms inside the home. We carried keys the way other people carried phones. I kept a ring in my pocket at all times. My wife kept one on her belt loop when she was home. We locked up tools. We locked up the basement door. We locked up the room where we stored anything sharp, heavy, or flammable. When we went asleep, we checked locks in a set order, like a ritual that might keep the night quiet. It did not make us feel safer. It only proved we were scared. His behavior kept darkening. He started to harm animals in small ways, not with gore, but with neglect and cruelty that made my wife and I stop bringing any pets into the house. He also started playing with fire. At first it was little burns on paper hidden in the trash. Then it was a scorched patch in the yard. We found singed corners behind the shed, like he had been practicing where we would not look. When we confronted him, he shrugged and said he did not know. When we pressed harder, he smiled and asked why we were so worried. We reported it. We begged for stronger intervention. The system moved slowly. Appointments took months. Programs had waiting lists. People told us to keep him supervised, as if we had not already turned our lives into constant supervision. Some professionals implied we were exaggerating. Others believed us and still had nothing that worked. So by the time my son was a teen, the family home did not feel like a home. It felt like a set of safe rooms. We lived behind doors we locked from the inside. We walked around our own kitchen like it was a place that could turn on us. I slept lightly and woke at small sounds, not because I was a careful father, but because I was afraid of what silence could hide. And then, when we had finally accepted that this was our life, my wife told me she was pregnant again. I waited for joy to appear in me and nothing came. I only felt fear, sharp and immediate, like another lock clicking shut. When my wife told me she was pregnant, we did not celebrate. We sat at the kitchen table with our hands flat on the wood, like we needed it to hold us down. The house was quiet in that moment, but it was not a safe quiet. It was the kind that meant my son was somewhere we could not see. My wife stared at the positive test like it was evidence. She did not smile. Her face stayed controlled, but her eyes looked wet and hard at the same time. I remember thinking that a normal couple would have hugged. We did not even reach for each other. We listened for footsteps in the hallway. We talked in short sentences, because longer ones turned into panic. We said we were too old to start over. We said we could not handle another year like the first year with our son. We said we could not bring a baby into a home with locks on the inside doors. We said the word safe like it was a thing we had once owned and lost. I asked the question that made my throat tighten. What if this baby was the same? My wife looked down at her hands and said very softly that she could not do it again. She did not mean pregnancy. She meant the life we had been living, the fear, the damage, the constant planning around a child who seemed to hate our existence. We discussed every option that people discussed in whispers. We did not say the words in a dramatic way. We said them like adults who had already lived through the worst part and did not want to pretend it was rare. We talked about ending the pregnancy. We talked about keeping it. We talked about what it would do to us if we brought another child into that house and then watched that child turn into something we could not reach. The hardest conversation came last: adoption. The first time my wife said it, she said it like she was ashamed of her own mouth. She said it was not about giving up. She said it was about not destroying another life. I felt sick when I agreed, because agreeing felt like betrayal and also like relief. That combination made me hate myself. We set a rule between us. It was not written down, but it felt like a contract. We would continue the pregnancy. We would prepare like we had prepared before. We would hope for a normal baby because hope was the only thing that kept us moving. But if the baby showed the same severe pattern, the same endless crying that never softened, the same emptiness behind the eyes, we would not keep the child. We would arrange adoption as early as we could. We told ourselves it was mercy. We told ourselves it was protection. We told ourselves it was the only way to keep the new baby from becoming our son, and to keep our son from harming someone smaller than him. My wife did not speak about it again after that night. She carried the decision inside her like a stone. During the pregnancy, my son reacted like the air itself had turned against him. He did not ask questions. He did not show curiosity. He only grew sharper. He slammed doors harder. He argued louder. He walked into rooms where we were talking and stood too close, forcing silence. Sometimes he put his ear against the locked door like he wanted to hear our breathing. We tried to keep him involved in safe ways. We tried to speak about the baby with calm voices. It did not work. The idea of something new in the house seemed to insult him. When my daughter was born, I waited for the terror to start. I waited for that first night when she would not stop crying and our bodies would go back into survival mode. I waited for the familiar dread to settle into my bones. It did not happen. She cried like a normal baby. She ate and slept in patterns that made sense. When she woke, she looked at our faces like she knew what faces were for. When my wife held her, the baby softened instead of stiffening. The first time my daughter fell asleep against my chest and stayed asleep, my eyes filled and I had to turn my head so my wife would not see me break. The relief hit us in waves, and each wave carried guilt inside it. I loved my daughter the way I had loved my son at the start, but this time the love did not have a knife edge of fear under it. It was clean. It was quiet. My wife started humming again without noticing she was doing it. I found myself standing in the hallway listening to the baby's breathing, not because I feared she would stop, but because it sounded like proof that normal life existed. And normal life changed everything. We did not relax, not fully. We still locked doors. We still hid sharp objects. We still kept keys close. But the baby's calm routine created a new rhythm in the house, and that rhythm made my son stand out like a stain that would not wash away. He watched us with her. He watched the way we smiled at her. He watched the way we spoke gently to her. He watched the way the house seemed to bend around her safety. the more normal life felt, the more my son seemed to rage against it. That morning started with shouting so loud, it made the baby twitch in her sleep. My son stood in the kitchen with his shoulders forward and his hands half closed, like he was always ready to grab something or hit something. My wife stayed between him and the hallway to the bedrooms without thinking about it. She did that a lot after the baby came. If he entered a room, her body changed first. Her face stayed calm, but her feet shifted into a better stance. Her hands stayed empty and visible. Her eyes tracked his hands. He screamed about something small. I barely remembered what. A rule, a consequence, a look he did not like. It did not matter. He wanted a fight more than he wanted a solution. I told him to lower his voice. He stepped closer and raised it. His words turned ugly fast, aimed at my wife, then at the baby, then at me. He said things that made my wife go still, the way she went still before she moved. I felt the old fear rise in my chest, but under it I felt something worse. I felt tired. I told him to go to his room. He laughed. He called me weak. He knocked a chair sideways with his knee like it was nothing. The baby cried from the noise, a normal startled cry, and my wife turned her head for half a second toward the hallway. My son saw that. He always saw that. He leaned in and said something quiet that I could not hear, but I saw my wife flinch. It was small. It lasted one blink. Then her face came back under control. My stomach tightened because my wife did not flinch at much. I stepped between them and told him to leave the kitchen. He shoved me with one hand, not hard enough to knock me down, just hard enough to show he could. My wife moved forward and he backed up, smiling like he had succeeded. Then he stormed out of the house. He slammed the front door so hard the frame rattled. I heard his footsteps on the porch. I heard the gate at the side yard hit the latch. Then his footsteps faded down the sidewalk. For a few seconds, the house felt like it had exhaled. I stood there with my hands shaking, staring at the empty space where he had been. My wife did not speak right away. She went to the hallway and checked on the baby. She lifted her gently, soothed her, and the baby settled. My wife looked at me, and I saw the same thing on her face that I felt in my chest. Relief. That relief made me feel sick, because it was relief from my own child. We moved through the next hour like people who had been holding their breath too long. We kept our voices low. We kept the baby close. We did small chores fast, like we were racing a clock we could not see. My wife kept glancing at the windows. I kept listening for the front door. When the baby finally fell asleep, we put her down in our bedroom because it was the safest room in the house. We had made it that way. We had replaced the door once, after my son kicked a hole in it during one of his rages. We had a keyed lock on that door, and we used it even during the day. My wife laid the baby in the crib and watched her chest rise and fall. The baby's face looked peaceful, like she belonged in a different family, in a different house, in a different world. My wife pulled the blanket up and then stopped herself, afraid of covering her too much. She kissed her forehead and stepped back. I turned the key in the lock. The click sounded too loud. We went to the kitchen and sat down, not because we wanted to relax, but because we did not know what else to do with quiet. The silence felt temporary. It felt borrowed. My wife rubbed her hands together slowly, over and over, like she was washing something off that I could not see. I watched the hallway and tried to tell myself that my son was gone for the day. Then the baby cried. At first it sounded like a normal waking cry, thin and annoyed. My wife stood up immediately. She moved toward the hall. I followed. Halfway there, the cry changed. It turned into that other sound. It turned into terror. It was higher and broken. It had no rhythm. It sounded like the baby had found the edge of her own life and was hanging over it. My wife ran. I ran behind her. The hallway narrowed, the way it always did when I panicked. My mind went empty except for one thought, loud as a siren. Locked door, locked door, locked door. We hit the bedroom door together. My wife grabbed the knob and twisted, even though she knew it was locked. I shoved my hand into my pocket and pulled out the key ring. The keys tangled. They scraped my knuckles. I dropped them once. Metal hit the floor and bounced toward the baseboard. The baby screamed again, and it sounded closer to choking than crying. I dropped to one knee and snatched the keys. My fingers were clumsy, swollen with adrenaline. I tried the first key and it did not fit. I tried the second and it went in but would not turn. My wife pressed her palm flat against the door like she could hold it shut from the outside, like she could keep something inside from happening. I forced myself to breathe once, hard, and tried another key. It turned. The lock clicked open, and my hand was already on the knob, already pulling, already pushing into the room. This was the moment everything we feared became real. Inside, my son stood over the crib with a kitchen knife in his hand. My daughter's arms jerked in frantic little motions. I saw small cuts on her skin, bright and wet against her soft baby flesh. My son looked up at me, and he smiled. For a second, my brain refused to connect the knife to my daughter. I saw the blade, I saw his hand, I saw her tiny arms jerking, and it still felt impossible, like the room had turned into a picture in someone else's story. Then my daughter made that torn, desperate sound again, and my body moved without asking me. I stepped toward the crib. My only thought was to get between her and him. I did not think about the knife going into me. I did not think about what a teenage boy could do with one quick swing. I only saw my baby's skin, soft and marked with thin, bright lines. The cuts looked small, but the fact that they existed made my stomach twist. Blood did not belong on a baby, not ever. My son stayed where he was. He did not jump back like he had been caught. He did not flinch. He did not look afraid. He looked bothered, like we had opened the door too soon. My wife came in beside me so fast I barely registered her moving. She did not speak. She did not scream. Her eyes locked on his hand and the blade, and her whole body tightened in a clean, controlled way. It scared me because it did not look like panic. It looked like certainty. She crossed the last step of distance and struck his wrist with the side of her hand. The knife flew sideways. It hit the wall with a hard smack, then clattered down and skidded under the dresser. The sound was sharp and final. The room changed immediately. The blade was no longer in his hand, but the danger did not leave. It just shifted into his body, his size, his eyes. My wife shoved him back from the crib with both hands, driving him into the dresser. The furniture banged against the wall. He grunted more from surprise than pain. He recovered in a blink and tried to step forward again, like he still had a job to finish. That was when I reached into the crib. I scooped my daughter up, clumsy and shaking, my fingers sliding under her back and neck the way I had done 1,000 times. She felt warm and too light. She smelled like milk and baby soap, and there was a thin metallic smell mixed in that made me want to gag. She screamed into my chest and grabbed at my shirt with tight, desperate fists. I turned my body sideways, making myself a barrier. I tucked her head under my chin and held her against me so hard I was afraid I would hurt her. I kept whispering her name even though she could not understand it. I needed to hear my own voice doing something gentle in that room. My son's eyes tracked the baby as I lifted her. His face stayed flat, almost blank. No tears, no shock, no apology. His mouth was slightly open, like he was about to say something, but he did not. He only watched. There was something in his expression that made my skin crawl, like he had been waiting to see what we would do. My wife stepped closer to him, putting herself between him and the dresser where the knife had gone. Her hands stayed up and empty. Her shoulders were squared. She did not look at me. She did not look at the baby. She looked only at him. He looked back at her with that same flat calm, and then he gave a small smile, the kind that lasted half a second, like a private joke. My wife's breathing changed. I could hear it over the baby's cries. It was fast but controlled, like she was forcing air into her lungs on purpose. Her jaw tightened so hard I saw a muscle jump near her ear. I backed toward the door, still holding the baby tight. My feet moved carefully because I did not want to trip, and because part of me expected my son to rush me from behind. I kept my eyes on him while I moved, scanning his hands, scanning his shoulders, looking for the moment he decided to grab me or grab her. He did not rush. He stayed where my wife had shoved him, his back near the dresser, his posture loose, like he had all the time in the world. He glanced once toward the floor where the knife had slid out of sight, and my heart kicked in my chest. My wife saw that glance too. She shifted one step to block the dresser completely, and her voice came out low and hard. She told him to stay back. He did not answer. He only stared at her, calm and steady, like he was judging her, like he was measuring what she would do next. The baby's cries rose and fell against my chest, and I could feel her shaking. I kept whispering to her, telling her she was safe, telling her I had her, even though I did not fully believe the words yet. My wife stood there for a few seconds that felt like minutes, and the room held its breath with her. Then she stopped thinking. She paused for a few seconds, and then she threw the first punch. My wife's fist landed with a dull sound that did not match the fact that it was our son she hit. It sounded like training, like practice, like something she had done 1,000 times in a clean room with rules and gloves. My son's head snapped to the side. The smile vanished. He tried to step forward and grab her, but she moved first. She stayed close enough that he could not build speed and far enough that his hands kept missing. She hit him again, then again, not wild, not flailing. Each punch came from a tight, controlled motion. She aimed to stop him, to drop him, to make him unable to move toward the crib again. I stood at the door with my daughter pressed to my chest, and I watched it happen like I was trapped behind glass. In my head, two commands fought each other. Stop her. He tried to kill the baby. I knew the first command was what a normal person did. I knew the second command was what my body believed. My arms tightened around my daughter until she squeaked, and I forced myself to loosen my grip. Her little face was red and wet. Her eyes were wide in a way I had never seen before. She did not understand what a knife was, but she understood fear, and she had just learned it inside the safest room in our house. That knowledge broke something in me. My son stumbled and hit the dresser with his hip. He tried to laugh again like he could turn it into a game, but the sound died in his throat. My wife drove him away from the crib, away from the dresser, away from where the knife had gone. Her feet shifted with purpose. She blocked him the way she had blocked doors for months, the way she had placed herself between him and the baby without even thinking. Only now she did not only block. She punished. He shouted at her. He called her names that made my ears burn. He said he would tell people. He said she was crazy. He said she would go to jail. He said it fast, like he was grabbing for any handle he could pull. My wife did not answer. She hit him again, and the air left his lungs in a sound that did not feel human. He stumbled, and then he tried to push past her, and she cut him off. She drove him back toward the corner near the closet, away from the door, away from me. For a second I thought he might turn on me instead. I imagined him rushing me, grabbing the baby, using her like a shield. That thought turned my blood cold. I looked down at my daughter's arm and saw a thin line of red already drying at the edge, another on her thigh, superficial, small, but real. I heard my wife's breath through her teeth. I heard my son start to cry. At first his crying sounded like anger, like insult. Then it changed into panic. He raised his arms over his face and tried to curl away from her. He started begging, not apologizing, not asking what he had done, just begging her to stop. He said "Mom" like he had not said it in years. He said it again and again, louder each time, as if volume could bring the old rules back. My wife's eyes stayed hard. She hit him through his guard, not with the same pattern now, not as clean. The control began to slip. She struck, and I saw her shoulders rise, and I saw her mouth twist, and I realized she was not only defending the baby anymore. She was releasing years. All the locks, all the keys, all the nights she listened for his footsteps, all the meetings at school where she smiled politely while people suggested sticker charts, all the moments she stood in a doorway and felt her body flinch before her mind could stop it. It poured out of her hands, and I did not move. I stood there with my daughter and I let my wife do it. I did not lift a hand, but I also did not pull her away. That was the decision that haunted me, even before the moment ended. I told myself I could not step between them. I told myself she was the only thing keeping him from the knife. I told myself that if I grabbed her, he would slip past me and finish what he started. These thoughts came fast, one after another, each one building a wall around my inaction. But beneath all of them was a simpler truth I did not want to name. Part of me wanted her to keep going. I hated myself for that, and I still did. My daughter's cries began to soften as I rocked her. She pressed her face into my shirt and gasped, then sobbed again, then gasped. I kept whispering nonsense words, anything steady. I backed into the hallway and turned sideways so I could still see into the room, still see my wife's body blocking the closet, still see my son sliding down the wall. My wife hit him again. I saw him curl tighter. I heard him start screaming, not angry now, not threatening, just raw screaming. My daughter startled at the sound and cried again, sharp and frightened. I looked down at her face and felt a sick clarity settle over me. My job was not to manage my wife. My job was to protect my baby. If I stayed in that doorway, I was keeping my daughter inside the noise, inside the violence, inside the smell of sweat and fear. I was letting the worst moment of her life fill her lungs. So I turned away. I carried her down the hallway and into the kitchen. My legs felt numb, like I had stepped off a curb wrong. I laid her on the table for half a second and then thought better of it and moved her to the counter where the light was stronger. My hands shook as I checked her skin. The cuts were thin. They did not look deep. There was no heavy bleeding, but I cleaned them anyway with a soft cloth and warm water, my mind obsessed with the idea of removing every trace of my son from her. She kept crying while I cleaned her. Then slowly, as I rocked her again, the crying thinned into hiccups. Her body relaxed in small waves. Her eyes blinked slower. Upstairs, the sounds did not stop. There were thuds and sharp breaths and my son's voice breaking into sobs, then screams, then sobs again. I stood in the kitchen holding my daughter against my chest, and I listened like a man listening to a storm from inside a basement. My baby finally went quiet in my arms, exhausted. But the sounds upstairs did not stop. I kept cleaning my daughter's skin, even after the water ran clear. The cuts looked like thin scratches, the kind a cat might leave on a hand. That fact should have calmed me. Instead, it made me colder because it meant he had started carefully. It meant he had time. It meant he could have done worse if we had arrived a minute later. My hands shook so much I had to brace my wrist against the counter. I dabbed instead of wiping because I did not want to open the lines again. My daughter's cries faded into tired little grunts, then into silence. She watched my face with wet lashes, and every time a sound came from upstairs her body tightened against mine. From the bedroom, the noise continued in broken bursts. Thuds. My son's voice rising into screams and then dropping into hoarse sobs. My wife's breath, sharp and forceful, like she had turned into a machine that did not know how to stop. I did not go back. I stood in the kitchen, rocking my daughter, listening to the upstairs as if I could measure danger by sound. I told myself that my wife was ending the threat. I told myself that if I stepped in, the knife might return to his hand. I told myself a lot of things. Then there was a different noise. A hard impact, followed by a long stretch of silence. In that silence, my heart beat so loud I felt it in my teeth. My daughter shifted and made a small, tired whimper. I covered her ear with my palm, as if that could erase what her body had already learned. Another sound came from upstairs, not a thud this time, a choking cough, A wet inhale, a shuffle like someone tried to move and failed. Then my wife screamed. It was not words. It was a sound that came from the deepest part of her, and it made my knees go weak. It lasted only a second and then it stopped, cut off like a switch had been flipped. I waited for footsteps. They did not come right away. When they finally did, they moved slowly down the hall above the kitchen, then down the short steps to the main area. The floor creaked, and each creak felt like a countdown. I held my daughter tighter and turned my body so I faced the hallway, ready to run if I had to. My wife appeared in the doorway. Her hair was loose and her face looked strange, like it belonged to someone older. There was blood on her forearms and on the front of her shirt. Her hands were swollen and red, and she held them slightly away from her body as if they hurt too much to touch anything. Her breathing sounded wrong, too fast and too shallow. She looked at the baby first. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and she stopped so close I could feel her heat. She did not touch our daughter at first. She only stared at her skin like she expected to see something worse than scratches. When she finally lifted her eyes to me, they were wide and flat, full of shock and something that looked like shame trying to break through. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then she asked me, in a voice I barely recognized, if he was dead. The question landed in the room like a heavy object. I stared at her and I hated myself because the first thing I felt was not horror. It was calculation. If he was dead, the threat was gone. If he was dead, my daughter was safe. If he was dead, our life might finally stop being a set of locked doors. I swallowed and told her I did not know. She nodded once, like she had expected that answer, and then her eyes drifted toward the hallway again, toward the closed bedroom door down the hall. Her jaw clenched, her shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse on the kitchen floor. I asked her what happened, and even as I asked, I already knew. I had heard it. She did not answer. She only looked at her hands, turning them slightly as if they belonged to someone else. Blood had dried in the lines of her knuckles. Her fingers trembled. She made a small sound, almost a laugh, but it broke into a shaky exhale. Then she said she needed a shower. It was the most normal sentence in the world, and it made me feel like I was losing my mind. She walked past me and down the hall without looking back. I heard the bathroom door close. I heard the lock click. I heard the shower turn on full, like she wanted the sound to cover whatever was left in her head. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding my daughter and listening to water run. My thoughts came in short, ugly pieces. Call an ambulance. Call the police. Do not call anyone. If you call, they take the baby. If you call, they take her away from us. If you do not call, he comes back. I knew what the right choice was. I also knew what fear did to choices. When my daughter started to fuss again, I warmed a bottle with shaking hands. I fed her while my eyes stayed on the hallway. I kept expecting my son to appear, limping, furious, with that knife back in his hand. Every small sound from upstairs made me jump. The shower stopped. My wife came out a few minutes later, wet hair clinging to her neck. She had changed her shirt. The blood was gone from her arms, but her hands were still swollen, and her face was pale in a way I had never seen on her. She looked cleaner but more damaged, like washing had removed the adrenaline and left only reality. She did not ask about my son again. She looked at the baby and said very quietly that we would not leave her alone, not for a second, not ever. Then she sat at the table like her legs had stopped working. She stared at the wall. Her eyes moved a little, but she did not focus on anything. When I spoke her name, she blinked slowly and looked at me like she had to remember who I was. I knew I had to go check on him. I hated that I knew it. I hated that it felt like a duty instead of love. I put my daughter in my wife's arms. My wife took her automatically, holding her tight against her chest. The baby made a small sound and then settled, as if she could feel which body had become the shield. I walked down the hallway to the bedroom. The door was open now. The lock looked useless, like a broken promise. The room smelled like sweat and something metallic. The crib sat slightly crooked from where I had bumped it when I grabbed the baby. My son lay on the floor near the wall. He was not moving much. His breathing was there, but it sounded rough, like each breath had to be pulled out of him. One eye was swollen. His face was marked with bruising. His lip looked split. His arms were drawn close to his body, protective, and his fingers twitched now and then. He looked smaller than he had looked with the knife in his hand. For a moment I waited for him to open his eyes and smile again. I waited for the calm cruelty to return. It did not. He made a low sound like he wanted to speak, and then he coughed. He was alive. I stood over him and felt nothing clean. No relief, no sympathy, no anger that made sense. Only a heavy numbness like my mind had shut a door. I should have knelt down. I should have checked his head, his ribs, his breathing properly. I should have called for help. I knew that. Instead, I backed out of the room. I walked to the kitchen and told my wife he was alive. She did not react the way I expected. She did not cry. She did not stand up and rush to him. She only closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them, her expression looked emptier, like she had been holding onto one last thread of control and it had snapped. We did not talk about hospitals. We did not talk about police. We did not talk about anything that involved other people seeing what our home had become. We looked at each other, and in that look was a decision made without words. It was not brave. It was not honorable. It was survival, the kind that scraped away your soul and left you moving anyway. We could not keep pretending. We were a family living together. So we stopped. That night we carried what we needed into the basement suite. Diapers, bottles, clothes, a few blankets, the baby's crib mattress. We moved quietly, like thieves in our own house. We locked the basement door from our side when we were done, and we kept the key on the table where we could grab it fast. Instead of taking him in, or turning him in, we moved into the basement and locked the world above us away. We moved into the basement suite, like we were hiding from a storm that had learned our names. It was an unfinished space meant to be rented out someday. It had a small bedroom, a bathroom, and a narrow living area that smelled like cold concrete. It also had its own door to the outside, down a set of steps along the side of the house. That separate entrance became our only way in and out. We kept the door locked. We kept the key within reach. We kept the lights low at night so our shadows did not move across the basement windows. Upstairs held everything that made a normal home work. The full kitchen, the laundry, our main phone, most of the baby's things. Even the clean bottles were up there, drying on the rack beside the sink. In the first days, I thought we would still go upstairs when he was asleep or when he was out. I thought we could manage it like a schedule. We did not go up. The first time I put my hand on the basement door knob from the inside, I imagined it turning from the other side at the same time. I imagined his face close to the crack as it opened, waiting, patient. My palm went slick with sweat. I pulled my hand back and stared at the door as if it had betrayed me. My wife kept the baby on her body like a shield. If the baby slept, she slept with her. If the baby woke, she woke first. Even in the bathroom, she kept the baby close enough that she could touch her with one hand. I watched my wife's eyes, the way they tracked every sound, and I realized she did not trust the house anymore. Not the walls, not the locks, not me. She trusted only her own arms. The first night, we barely spoke. We sat on the basement couch, holding our breath, listening. We heard him upstairs. At first it was slow movement, like he was packing. Then a drawer opened. A cabinet door closed. A footstep paused above our heads, directly over the basement living room, and I froze with my mouth slightly open, afraid that even breathing would tell him where we were. My wife looked up at the ceiling with the same fixed stare she had used in the bedroom. Her swollen hands rested on her knees. The bruises on her knuckles were darkening now. She flexed her fingers and winced. She did not say a word. In the morning, there was silence. That silence felt worse than footsteps. Silence meant planning. Silence meant he had stopped reacting and started thinking. I stood at the basement window and watched the strip of street we could see between bushes. I expected his shadow to cross it at any moment. I expected a police car. I expected an ambulance. I expected something from the world outside to show up and force a decision we had refused to make. Nothing came. I still went to work. I told myself I had to. We needed money. We needed to look normal. But I drove with both hands locked on the steering wheel, jumping at every car behind me. In the parking lot, I kept checking my mirrors. At my desk, every time the phone rang, my stomach tightened. I expected a call from my wife saying he had found the basement door. I expected her voice shaking, the baby screaming in the background. Instead, she sent short messages. We were okay, the baby ate, the baby slept. No mention of him. We did not type his name. When I came home each day, I approached the basement entrance like it was a crime scene. I listened before I opened the door. I looked at the steps. I looked for marks in the dust. I looked for anything that showed someone had stood there waiting. My wife opened the door for me and pulled it shut fast behind me, like the outside air itself could bring him in. We ate simple food, whatever we had managed to bring down, canned things, bread, formula. We washed bottles in the small bathroom sink, one at a time, the water turning cold before we were finished. We kept a trash bag tied tight in the corner because we were afraid to carry it outside too often. The basement became a small, controlled world with one rule. Do not go upstairs. After a week, the sounds changed. He moved less. When he did move, it was quick and sharp, like he was angry at the floor for existing. One night, a chair scraped hard across the kitchen above us. Another night, the front door opened and closed, and my wife and I stared at each other, unsure if that meant he had left or if he had only stepped outside to prove he could return any time he wanted. Then came the smashing. It happened in the afternoon when I was home early. I heard a crash so loud it made the basement light fixture tremble. Glass shattered. Something heavy hit the wall upstairs. Then another impact and another. It sounded like the house was being taken apart piece by piece. My wife grabbed the baby and backed into the basement bedroom. She did not cry. She did not speak. Her eyes went wide and bright, and she pulled the bedroom door nearly shut, leaving only a thin crack so she could see me. I stood in the living area facing the basement door, holding a metal flashlight like it was a weapon. Each crash from upstairs made me flinch. I waited for the basement door handle to jiggle. I waited for the lock to rattle. I waited for his weight to hit the door like a battering ram. It never happened. The smashing stopped as suddenly as it started. After that, the house returned to quiet, but not a calm quiet. It felt hollow, like the rooms above us had been emptied of meaning. Days passed with only small noises. A step here, a drawer there, sometimes nothing at all. My wife began to whisper at night. She asked me what I thought he was doing. She asked if I thought he was hurt worse than we knew. She asked if he was waiting for us to come up first. I did not have answers. Every answer sounded like a trap. The strangest part was that he never came downstairs. He never tested the basement door. He never called our names. He never asked for food. He never begged. He never threatened from the top of the stairs. It was as if he had decided the basement was not worth his time, or as if he enjoyed the idea that we were down there by choice. Each morning felt like a test. Each night felt like a longer one. Then the house went quiet for days, and the silence became so complete that I started to hear my own heartbeat again. And that was when I finally went upstairs. I opened the basement door like I expected it to explode in my face. The lock turned too easily, and that scared me more than resistance would have. I listened with my ear close to the wood. No breathing, no footstep shifting weight, no slow movement that meant someone waited on the other side with patience. I climbed the stairs one at a time. I kept my hand on the wall to steady myself because my legs felt wrong, like they belonged to a stranger. Halfway up, I stopped and listened again. The house stayed silent. It was a deep, empty silence, the kind that made small sounds feel loud in your own skull. At the top, I reached the hallway. I expected two things, and both felt unbearable. I expected to find my son sitting there, calm, watching, ready. Or I expected to find him dead somewhere in the house, stiff and cold, turning our fear into something final and criminal. I saw neither. I saw damage. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was a mix of old food, sweat, and something sharp like broken wood. Then I saw the kitchen. One cabinet door hung from a single hinge. Drawers had been pulled out and dumped. Plates lay shattered across the floor, ground into the tile like someone had stepped on them on purpose. A chair was on its side, one leg broken. The table had deep gouges, long lines carved into the surface as if someone had dragged a blade across it again and again. I moved forward slowly, careful where I placed my feet. Every crackle of glass under my shoe made my stomach jump. I kept looking at corners, at doorways, at the narrow space behind the refrigerator. My eyes kept searching for the outline of a body or a face in shadow. The living room was worse. A lamp had been smashed. The curtains had been torn down on one side. The couch cushions had been ripped open, stuffing scattered like snow across the carpet. The front door showed marks near the handle, deep dents in the wood. The wall beside it had a hole at shoulder height, like someone had driven a fist through drywall until it gave up. I said his name once quietly. No answer came back. I walked to his room. The door was half open and I pushed it wider with two fingers like it might be hot. Inside, the mattress was off the bed frame. His dresser drawers were dumped. The closet door had been punched so hard the thin panel bowed inward. The room looked stripped, like he had searched for something, then destroyed what he could not take with him. I checked the bathroom. The mirror was cracked. The towel rack had been torn loose. The tub was dry. I checked my wife and my bedroom. The crib was empty, moved slightly from where we had left it, and it made my throat tighten even though the baby was safe downstairs. A picture frame lay face down on the floor. I turned it over and saw the glass broken across our wedding photo. The image underneath had been scratched until our faces were damaged. I did not know if that was a message or just another act of anger. Either way, my hands started shaking again. I walked the whole main floor twice, then a third time, because my mind would not accept the outcome. It felt wrong that he could simply be gone. He had been a force in our house for so long that the idea of empty space where he should be felt like a trick. But he was gone. His shoes were missing from the rack by the door. His coat was not on the hook. A few other things were missing too, small items I noticed only because they were part of our careful routines. He had left through the front door, and he had not come down to the basement even once to do it. I went back downstairs and told my wife he was not there. She did not celebrate. She did not cry. She only nodded like she had expected either outcome and did not trust the good one. She pulled the baby closer and asked me if I was sure. I told her I was. For a long time, we still did not go upstairs at night. Even after we knew he was gone, we moved through the house like it was an unsafe building. We spoke in low voices. We checked locks twice. We kept lights on in rooms we were not in, as if brightness could hold something back. Every car that slowed near the house made my heart climb into my throat. Then the repairs started. We cleaned glass and broken wood. We patched holes. We replaced locks he had damaged. We threw away what could not be saved. We did it over weeks and then months, piece by piece, because the house had been chewed up from the inside. Each repair felt like a small attempt to rebuild a world that had never really been stable. But even as the walls looked normal again, my mind did not. He did not come back that day, but the fear of his return stayed for years. Every time the doorbell rang, I flinched. Every time someone knocked hard, I pictured his fist. Every time the baby cried in a strange way, my body moved before my thoughts did. And one question stayed with me, sharp and constant, even after the last patch dried and the last broken thing was replaced. If he could leave that easily, could he return just as easily to finish what he started? We stayed in that house for a while after he left, because we were tired and broke and we told ourselves the locks were enough. But every repair we made felt like painting over a warning sign. The holes in the walls disappeared under new drywall, yet I still remembered where each one had been. I still saw them when the lights were off. The house looked normal again, but it never felt like ours. The fear followed us into small moments. If the phone rang late, I stared at it until it stopped. If a stranger stood too long on the sidewalk, I watched from behind a curtain. If a car slowed near the driveway, my body tightened as if a blow was coming. I checked windows before bed and then checked them again. I kept track of where the baby was every second, even after she stopped being a baby. I told myself it was just being careful, but it was not care. It was expectation. I expected him to return. My wife lived the same way. She did not talk about what she had done. She did not ask about him, but she watched doors like they were living things. When she heard footsteps behind her in a store, she moved without thinking, placing her body between the sound and our daughter. If our daughter cried in public, my wife did not blush the way most parents did. She went pale, like the world had narrowed to one scream again. Years passed with no contact from him. No call, no letter, no message left with family. People asked where our son was, and we learned to answer with a small shrug and a flat voice. We said he lived elsewhere. We said he was not in touch. We acted like it was normal. We became good at hiding the shape of the truth. Not knowing where he went did not bring peace. It brought a different kind of fear, a fear with no target. I did not know if he was alive or dead. I did not know if he hurt someone else. I did not know if he sat in some room thinking about our address. Sometimes I imagined him standing outside our window, older now, watching our lights like I had watched his footsteps from the basement. That was why we moved. We did not announce it. We did not celebrate it. We treated it like moving a body, quiet and fast. New locks, new routines, different streets, different neighbors. The moment we closed the door of the new place for the first time, I felt something in my chest loosen. It was not happiness. It was space. Distance. It was the first time in years I could sit with my back to a door without feeling exposed. Even then, I did not tell anyone our new address unless I had to. I avoided old friends who might mention it in casual talk. I looked over my shoulder in parking lots. I taught myself to notice faces. I watched hands. I listened to tone. My wife did the same. We did not call it fear anymore. We called it being smart. Our daughter grew up in the shadow of it without understanding the shape. We tried to give her a normal childhood, but normal did not fit in our hands. I was too tense. My wife was too alert. We did not bring up her brother. We did not show her photos. We locked away anything that might invite questions too early. There was relief in the years of silence, but there was also grief that stayed hidden. Grief did not always look like crying. Sometimes it looked like a blank spot in conversation. Sometimes it looked like a chair that stayed empty through every holiday and no one ever said why. Sometimes it looked like me waking up at night, hearing a noise that was not real, and walking the house with my heart racing. Decades passed like that. My wife eventually got sick. It was not sudden. It was a slow, steady change that stole her strength in small pieces. I did not describe the details to people because I could not stand the pity in their eyes. I only knew that the woman who had once stood between a knife and a crib began to struggle to stand at all. Near the end, she became quiet in a different way. The alertness faded, not because she felt safe, but because her body could not hold the tension anymore. Some nights she stared at the ceiling and whispered that she could still hear the baby crying. She did not say our son's name, but I could tell she saw him when she closed her eyes. When she died, the house became too large and too silent. The quiet did not feel peaceful. It felt like the kind of quiet that came before something returned. That was when my daughter, now an adult, asked me to live with her. She had a spouse, steady and kind, and she had 2 children of her own. My grandchildren filled rooms with normal noise, laughter, footsteps, toys falling over, voices calling for help with small problems, the kind that had clear answers. It should have healed me. In some ways it did. In other ways it only showed me what we had lost. Even in that safer home, I still noticed exits first. I still listened for the wrong kind of silence. When my grandson cried sharply one day after a fall, my vision narrowed and my hands went cold, and I had to sit down before my legs gave out. The past did not stay in the past. It waited in my body like a reflex. I started therapy because my daughter asked me to. I told myself it was for her peace, not mine. The therapist listened without flinching. She did not excuse me and she did not attack me. She only kept bringing me back to the moment I avoided for years. The bedroom door, the knife, my wife's fist, my choice to turn away. One day she told me to write it down, start to finish, without trying to make myself look better. She said some questions did not go away just because you refused to speak them out loud. So I wrote, and when I finished, I still did not feel clean. I had no contact with my son for decades. I did not look for him. I did not want him to find me. Sometimes that truth felt like protection. Sometimes it felt like cowardice. Now I was old, living in a house full of people I loved, and I still carried the same question like a stone in my pocket. Was I wrong to let it happen? I read the responses late at night, after my grandchildren fell asleep and the house turned quiet. The same quiet always made my body listen for danger, even in a safe home. My daughter's hallway light glowed under the door. The refrigerator hummed, and my screen kept filling with strangers judging the worst day of my life like it had happened in front of them. I had expected hatred. I had expected people to call me a monster and move on. Some did. But what unsettled me was how many people sounded certain. They sounded sure they knew exactly what I should have done, what my wife should have done, what my son deserved, what my daughter almost lost. I had lived inside that house for years, and still I had not felt certain. Reading certainty from strangers made my stomach twist. The first camp sounded like a door slamming shut in my favor. Protect the baby at any cost. They wrote that he crossed a final line the moment he held a knife over a crib. They wrote that nothing before that mattered, not his age, not his diagnosis, not his history. A baby could not run. A baby could not fight. A baby could not understand. They wrote that I did the correct thing by grabbing my daughter and getting her out. They wrote that in that moment my wife's fists were not revenge, they were an emergency stop, the only sure way to end the threat. I read those lines and felt something dangerous inside me, relief. It came like warm water in cold hands. It told me I was not alone. It told me I was not evil for freezing. It told me that any father would have made the same choice. Then the relief turned sharp, because some of them described what my wife did as if it had been clean. A quick strike, a controlled takedown, a single decision. They spoke like the beating ended the moment the knife left his hand. It did not. I stared at the screen, and I remembered my son begging. I remembered the sound of his voice breaking into something small. I remembered choosing the kitchen instead of the doorway. I remembered how long the noises continued after my daughter quieted in my arms. So even when people defended us, I felt exposed. Their defense did not match the full truth. It matched the part of the truth that was easiest to hold. Still, I could not deny their main point. The baby had been the priority. I had not been there to teach a lesson. I had been there to stop a death. My wife had moved like someone protecting her child from an animal in the room. I understood that instinct in my bones. I had lived with it for years. The second camp did not argue about the knife. They argued about everything that happened after. They wrote that stopping an immediate threat was one thing and what came next was something else. They wrote that once the knife was gone and I had the baby, the next step should have been outside help. Police, emergency services, a hospital, anything that brought witnesses and rules. They wrote that leaving a badly injured person unattended risked death, even if that person had been a danger. They wrote that my wife could have killed him without meaning to, and then we would have lived with a dead son and a living criminal case. They wrote that even if he survived, untreated injuries could have caused permanent damage. They wrote that choosing silence over help was not protection, it was panic. That camp made me angry at first. Not because they were wrong, but because they spoke like help had been a simple phone call. Like help arrived in clean uniforms and solved problems without making new ones. Like the system would have protected our daughter while also handling our son with perfect care. In my mind, I saw what I had feared back then. Questions at the door. Social workers looking at my wife's swollen hands. Police looking at the damaged house. Our baby taken away for safety because two adults could not control their teenage son. My wife arrested. My son placed back into our home afterward because he was still a minor and options were limited. The knife incident reduced to a bad family fight. The baby's cuts described as small, as if small meant harmless. I had carried those fears for years. Reading strangers dismiss them as excuses made my throat tighten. And still, as I kept reading, the anger faded into something uglier. Because I also saw what was true in their words. We had made a decision that day that went beyond the moment. We had chosen isolation. We had moved into the basement and locked the door and acted like the world did not exist. We had listened to our son move around upstairs and hoped he would leave. We had hoped the problem would solve itself without us speaking to anyone who could judge us. That was not a heroic plan. It was a desperate one. The third camp did not focus on the knife or the phone call. They focused on my confession. They wrote that the most frightening sentence was not about the blade. It was that I had been happy my wife did it. They wrote that a parent could feel fear and rage in a crisis, but feeling satisfaction while a child was being beaten was a warning sign. They wrote that years of suffering did not erase responsibility. They wrote that I had become what I feared, that I had turned my home into a battleground, and then acted surprised when it became one. Some of them wrote that my son had been sick, that he needed treatment, that violence would only create more violence. Some wrote that my wife's training made it worse because it meant she could cause maximum harm efficiently. Some wrote that my daughter would carry damage from that day even if she did not remember it, because Bobby's remembered fear in the body. Those responses made my skin feel tight, like it did in that basement suite. I wanted to argue. I wanted to list every locked door we had installed, every therapist we had seen, every time I had tried to hold our son while he screamed as a child, every time I had cleaned up something he destroyed and still told myself tomorrow would be better. I wanted to say, they did not know what it was like to live with a threat inside your own home. But I also knew something that made me quiet. They were not the first to call me numb. My therapist had not used that word as an insult, but she had circled it like it mattered. She had asked what happiness meant in that moment. She had asked whether it was joy or relief or the release of years of fear. She had asked whether I felt happy because my son suffered, or because my daughter survived, or because for once I did not feel powerless. When strangers called it evil, it stung. When my therapist called it survival, it still stung, because survival did not make it clean. I kept scrolling until my eyes burned. People argued with each other the way people always did when they felt safe. Some wrote that any force was justified when a child was threatened. Others wrote that revenge was never justified, no matter what. Some wrote that my wife should have stopped sooner. Others wrote that she should not have stopped at all. Some wrote that my son had been born broken. Others wrote that we had broken him by failing him. None of them had sat in that kitchen holding a bleeding infant while the sounds upstairs continued. And I realized I had been doing something unfair without noticing it. I had wanted a verdict that would erase my choice. I had wanted strangers to declare me innocent so I could stop hearing my own memory. Or I had wanted them to declare me guilty in a clear way so I could finally accept punishment and be done with it. Instead, I got something harder. I got arguments that all carried pieces of truth. The baby had been in danger, that was real. I had heard it in her cry, and I had seen it on her skin. My son had been dangerous, that was real too. He had stood over a crib with a knife in a locked room. And our response had gone too far. That was also real. Not only the beating, but the silence afterward, the decision to handle it alone, the choice to become a family hiding in a basement while a wounded teenager moved above us like a ghost we refused to name. Three truths could exist at once. The baby was in danger, the son was dangerous, and the response went too far. That line stayed in my head as I read more comments. It did not free me, but it stopped me from lying to myself in either direction. I looked up from the screen and listened to the house. The hallway light still glowed, the refrigerator still hummed. My grandson turned in his sleep and made a soft sound. Safety surrounded me now, and still my hands felt cold. I thought about that bedroom door again. I thought about the knife. I thought about the way my wife moved without hesitation. I thought about the moment I turned away. And the comments that frightened me most were not the harsh ones. They were the ones that asked a simple question, over and over in different words. If not that, then what? If I had grabbed my wife and pulled her off him, would my son have reached for the knife again? If I had tried to restrain my son, would he have used the baby as leverage? If I had called for help, would anyone have arrived in time to matter? If I had done everything right, would my daughter have lived? I closed the screen and sat in the dark with those questions pressing down on me, because no verdict from strangers changed the core of it. But if not this, then what? What real option did we have in that exact moment? The next night I kept reading, because stopping felt like turning away again. I had told myself the comments were just noise, but each one pulled at a different part of the same wound. Some people wrote like judges. Some wrote like family. Some wrote like they had lived in a house like mine and recognized the smell of fear through a screen. One camp kept repeating a phrase that made my throat tighten. The system failed this family. They did not call my wife a hero, and they did not call her a monster. They did not call my son evil, and they did not call him a victim. They wrote about years. They wrote about the slow grind of trying professionals and plans and meetings and labels, and still watching a child get worse. They pointed out something I had tried not to think about. If you kept seeking help and nothing changed, then the problem had been bigger than discipline and love. They wrote that schools often pushed dangerous kids out of normal classes because they could not keep others safe. They wrote that services often moved slowly and stopped at the edge of what they could legally do. They wrote that a family could end up trapped between responsibility and helplessness, forced to keep living with someone who terrified them, because there was nowhere else for that person to go. Reading that, I felt seen in a way that scared me. Because it meant our fear had been predictable. It meant other families had been pushed into the same corner. It meant what happened in that bedroom was not just one bad day. It had been the end of a long road where every door closed a little more. But even as I felt understood, I felt a quiet anger too, not at the commenters, at myself, because I had used the idea of failure like a blanket. If the system failed, then I could pretend my choices did not matter. If the system failed, then my hands were clean. They were not. Another camp did not argue about ethics at all. They argued about reality. They said they did not believe me. They wrote that the escalation sounded too extreme, too neat, too repetitive. They wrote that the details felt like scenes from a movie, like someone had stitched together every nightmare headline into one story. They wrote that no parents would live through something like that without police involvement. They wrote that no teenager could do those things without leaving a trail outside the home. Their disbelief hit me harder than insults. Anger I understood, judgment I expected, but disbelief felt like being erased. I stared at my screen and felt heat in my face. For a second I wanted to list proof, dates, names, addresses, photographs of damage, medical records for injuries we never reported. I wanted to prove that my life had been real. Then I stopped myself because the point of writing it down had never been to win a debate. It had been to drag the truth into the light where I could look at it without flinching. Still, their suspicion touched something true about the way these stories sounded online. Out there, everything looked like entertainment. Out there, terrible things were consumed like campfire tales. If a story sounded too dark, people protected themselves by calling it fake. They needed the world to be safer than it was. I understood that need. I had needed it too. Back when my son was small and angry and I still believed there would be a neat explanation, I had wanted to believe this kind of thing did not happen inside quiet houses. So I read those skeptical comments and told myself this. Even if someone did not believe every detail, the moral question still mattered. What did a parent do when a child became dangerous? What did duty mean when love started to feel like a liability? Those questions did not disappear just because a stranger doubted my words. Then I found the comments that were hardest to sit with, because they did not offer comfort or rejection. They offered a sentence that kept repeating in different forms. Trauma explained, but it did not excuse. These people wrote with empathy and still held a line. They wrote that chronic fear changed the brain, changed judgment, changed what felt normal. They wrote that living in constant alert could make a person react like an animal, even when they were human and wanted to be good. They wrote that my wife's reaction made sense as a protective reflex. But they also wrote that prolonged violence was still violence. They wrote that an emergency strike to stop a knife was one thing, and continuing past that point was another. They wrote that even if my wife had been out of her mind with fear, my job had been to step in when the danger ended. They wrote that my numbness sounded like a trauma response, but trauma did not erase choice. Trauma did not give permission. Trauma could explain why I froze, but it did not make freezing right. I read those comments more slowly than the others. I could feel my body resisting them, like a muscle tightening to avoid pain, because those words did not let me hide behind love or behind terror. They pushed me into the one place I had tried to avoid for decades. The moment after the knife hit the floor. Not the moment of threat, but the moment of decision. The moment where I could have said enough. The moment where I could have tried to pull my wife back. The moment where I could have called for help even if it destroyed the life we wanted. That camp did something the others did not. They held empathy and accountability together, and it felt like someone pressing on a bruise to find the exact shape of it. I realized something then. Some people defended me because they could picture the baby. They could picture small skin and helpless crying. Their minds went straight to protection. Some people condemned me because they could picture the beating. Their minds went straight to punishment. But the people who wrote about trauma were looking at the whole room at once. They saw the baby, the knife, the years, the fear, and the collapse that followed. They were not trying to simplify it. They were trying to tell me I had been a human being in an impossible place, and that I still had to own what I did. The last camp I read that night made my stomach drop, because it attacked the part of me that still wanted to be a father to both of my children. A parent still owed care. They wrote that even a violent teen was not disposable. They wrote that my son could have been restrained, treated, removed from the home through legal channels, anything but beaten and abandoned. They wrote that protecting the baby and getting outside support could both be true goals, and that I had chosen the one path that served my fear best. Some wrote that it was not only my son who had been in danger that day. It had been my wife too. It had been me too. It had been our daughter. They wrote that when a family started using violence to solve violence, the whole house became unsafe. They wrote that by refusing to seek help afterward, we had taken a private crisis and turned it into a sealed room where anything could happen. That word sealed stayed with me. Because that was what we had done when we moved into the basement and locked the door. We had sealed ourselves away from our own child. We had sealed the world out so it could not judge us, but also so it could not protect anyone. I wanted to argue with them. I wanted to say they did not know my son. I wanted to say they had not seen his eyes when he enjoyed making someone afraid. I wanted to say we had tried care for years and it had not worked. But the problem was that their words were not only about my son. They were about me. A parent still owed care. A parent still owed action. A parent still owed responsibility even when it was ugly and dangerous and humiliating. I sat there in the dark, listening to the house, and I thought about how many times I had said I had no choice. I had said it like a prayer. But choice was not only about the knife. It was about what I did with my hands afterward. It was about the phone that stayed on the hook. It was about the door I locked and the silence I accepted as a plan. As I scrolled, I noticed a strange pattern. The comments did not agree on blame. They argued in circles and called each other names and dragged their own histories into the fight. But they agreed on one thing. This had been a family living in terror. Even the skeptics who doubted my story wrote that if it was true, it was terror. Even the people who defended my wife wrote that she had snapped from terror. Even the people who condemned us wrote that fear had driven it. The words sat there again and again, as if strangers could smell the basement concrete and hear the upstairs footsteps through my paragraphs. I closed my eyes and I was back in that house. I was back in the basement suite, listening for the door handle to move, holding a flashlight like it would save my child. I was back in the kitchen, cleaning tiny cuts while the sounds continued upstairs. I was back in the hallway, staring at a locked bedroom door and feeling relief and shame twist together like wire. My therapist had asked me once what I had expected to feel when it was over. I had told her I did not know. That was a lie. I had known. I had expected relief. I had wanted relief so badly it had scared me. I had wanted quiet. I had wanted safety. I had wanted the problem to end, no matter what that ending looked like. That night, after reading hundreds of strangers arguing about my soul, I understood what truly frightened me. It was not only that I had frozen. It was not only that my wife had gone too far. It was that part of me had felt relief when the shouting ended. And I still did not know what to do with that fact. When the house was quiet now, it still did not feel empty to me. It felt like a pause. My grandchildren slept down the hall, safe in a way my mind still struggled to accept. The floorboards creaked when the heat turned on, and my body reacted before my thoughts did. I listened for a footstep that did not belong. I listened for a door that did not open. I listened the way I had listened in the basement suite, when a teenage boy moved above us and we waited to find out if we would live through the night. I lived in a warm home with people who loved me, and still the memory returned in flashes that made me taste metal in my mouth. A sharp infant cry on a television show could tighten my chest. A kitchen knife left on a counter could pull my eyes to it until someone put it away. The sound of a child laughing could turn into the sound of a child screaming in my head, and I had to grip the edge of a chair to remind myself where I was. That was the part I did not know how to explain to anyone who had not lived it. The danger ended decades ago, but my body never accepted that it ended. It kept searching for the moment before the knife hit the floor, as if replaying it could change what came next. People wanted the story to have one clean lesson. Some said we were heroes because our daughter lived. Some said we were monsters because our son might not have. Some said we were victims of a broken system. Some said we were liars. All of them wanted an ending that fit inside a sentence. I never had that kind of ending. The true dilemma was not hard to name. An infant had been in danger and my job had been to protect her. I did protect her. I grabbed her. I covered her small body with mine. I got her away from the knife. If I had failed, she might have died, and I would have died inside right after her. But the other part of the dilemma stayed in my throat like a thorn. When the knife was gone, the threat should have ended. Instead, the violence continued, and I did not stop it. I did not even try. I left the room, and I listened to it happen. Later, I looked at what my wife had done to our son, and I chose silence again. No hospital, no police, no outside help. I told myself it was because I was protecting my baby. I told myself it was because I feared what would happen if we brought strangers into our home. I told myself I had no choices that would not destroy us. And deep down, there was a reason I did not want a name for years. Part of me felt relief. Relief that someone else had finally met his violence with greater violence. Relief that I did not have to be the one who did it. Relief that I could hold my daughter and pretend my hands were clean while my wife's hands did what mine never could. That was the part that made me feel sick when I admitted it, even to myself. Because relief did not feel like love. Relief felt like letting something terrible happen because it served me. I carried guilt for my inaction, but that was not the only weight. I carried grief too, and it was complicated grief. The kind people did not understand because it was not about a person I missed. It was grief for what never existed. The son I thought I would have when we planned that first pregnancy. The family dinners that never happened. The safe house that was supposed to be ours. I grieved the way I had hoped he would grow out of it, even after the professionals told us to manage expectations. I grieved the version of my wife who used to smile without checking the locks. I grieved the version of myself who thought effort and patience could fix anything. And then there was the strangest grief of all. I grieved my son, even though I was afraid of him. I did not know where he went. I never found out. For years, I lived as if his shadow might appear at the end of any street. I watched crowds for a face that matched an older version of his. I listened for news stories that might carry his fingerprints in the details. I wondered whether he changed, whether he grew into someone harmless, whether he hurt someone else, whether he was even alive. Not knowing became its own prison, because if he was gone and had changed, then what we did looked even worse. And if he was gone and had not changed, then what we did looked like something that might have saved someone else. I could not prove either. I could not solve the question with facts. All I had was memory, and memory was cruel because it did not arrive in order. It arrived in sharp pictures. My daughter's tiny arm with thin cuts. My son's shoulders hunched over the crib. My wife's face as she moved, not like a person making a choice, but like a force of nature. The sound of blows after the knife was already gone. My own hands cleaning my baby while another child in the next room took damage that I allowed. The hardest truth was that I understood every side of the argument, and that understanding did not set me free. I understood the instinct to protect a baby at any cost. I understood the moral line that said the beating should have stopped. I understood the fear of outside systems, and I understood the danger of hiding from them. I understood my wife's rage, and I understood why it haunted her. I understood my own numbness, and I understood why numbness was not an excuse. That was why I still wanted judgment from strangers, even though it hurt. I wanted someone to tell me what a good parent was supposed to do when one child became the threat to another. I wanted a rule I could follow backward in time. But there was no backward. So I asked the only question that still mattered, the one I could not answer without lying. If you were me, what would you have done in the seconds after the knife was knocked away? And what would you have done in the hours after? Would you have pulled your wife off your son and risked him grabbing the knife again? Would you have called for help and risked losing your baby to the system you did not trust? Would you have stayed and tried to control the situation with your own hands, knowing how badly it could go? I did not want simple verdict words. I wanted an alternative plan. I wanted to know what safety steps you would take, what moral limits you would draw, and how you would live with the outcome after. Because I survived. My daughter grew up. I became a grandfather. I lived long enough to sit in a quiet house and tell the truth in plain words. And still, the question followed me like a second shadow. Some families survived by leaving, but can you ever leave the guilt behind?